Fourth, further, they never cease to express their fear of another rising, their guilty consciences dictating that they deserve greater opposition. Hence, to secure themselves and incapacitate the people from further attempts of that nature, they order all withdrawers from church who did not join to suppress the Lord's people to deliver up their arms betwixt and such a day, and not keep an horse above such a very mean price, unfit for service. Seventh, what force could not do the business? Then they try flatteries, and hence contrive that wicked indulgence to divide and destroy the ministers that remained, and to suppress meetings. But when this bait so well busked could not catch all, but still there were meetings for administering the ordinances, their flattery turns to fury, and the acceptance of that indulgence by some, and despising of it by others, did both animate and instigate them unto a following forth of their design by all the cruel acts and bloody executions. And hereby the residue of the faithful of the land were exposed unto their rage, while the indulged became interpretively guilty of, and accessory to, all the cruelties used and executed upon ministers and professors for adhering unto that way. Hence it was common at private and peaceable meetings, when, without arms of defense, they were disturbed by soldiers, and exposed to all manner of villainous violence, some being dragged to prisons, some banished, and sold to French captains to be transported with rascals. Many intercommuned and driven from their dwellings and relations. Great sums of money were proffered to any that would bring in several of the most eminent ministers, either dead or alive. Yea, several at several times were killed, and others cruelly handled, all which for several years they patiently endured without resistance. But especially when not only they were driven to the fields to keep their meetings in all weathers, summer and winter, but necessitate to meet with arms, then they raised more troops of horse and dragoons to pursue them with all rage as traitors and rebels. Hence what pursuings, hornings, huntings, hidings, wanderings through mountains and muirs, and all kinds of afflictions the people of God then met with, because of their following that necessary and signally blessed duty. All the land's inhabitants know, the jailers can witness to this day, and the barbarous soldiers, bloody executioners of the commands of their enraged masters, having orders to wound and kill, and apprehend all they could take at these meetings, or on the way suspected to be going to or coming from them, having encouragement to apprehend some ministers and bring them dead or alive by the promise of 2,000 merks, others valued at 1,000, and several professors also with prices put upon their heads. Hence others that were taken of them were sent into the baths, a dry and cold rock in the sea, where they had no fresh water, nor any provision but what they had brought many miles from the country, and when they got it, it would not keep unspoiled. And others, both ministers and many hundreds of professors, were outlawed, whereby all the subjects were prohibited to reset, supply, intercommune with any of them, or to correspond with them by word, writ, or message, or furnish them with meat, drink, house, harbor, victual, or any other thing useful under the highest pains. Hence also prisons were filled, and the wives and children of the outed ministers that were come to Edinburgh for shelter were commanded to dislodge within a short day prefixed, under the pain of being forcibly shut up or dragged out, for which and other such uses to apprehend and seize on meetings. A major was appointed at Edinburgh, which command over the town guards and a good salary for that end, with command over the town guards and a good salary for that end. Then prisons being filled, they were emptied to make room for others in ships to be taken away, to be sold for slaves, in one of which were sent to Virginia above 60 men, some ministers, who through the kindness and sympathy of some English godly people were relieved at London, a greater barbarity not to be found in the reigns of Caligula or Nero. Eighth, but all this is nothing to what followed, when, thinking these bloodhounds were too favorable, they brought down from the highlands an host of savages upon the western shires, more terrible than Turks or Tartars, men who feared not God nor regarded man, and, being also poor pitiful skybalds, they thought they had come to a brave world, to waste and destroy a plentiful country, which they resolved, before they left it, to make as bare as their own. This hellish crew was adduced to work a reformation, like the French conversions, to press a band of conformity, wherein every subscriber was bound for himself, and all under him, wife, children, servants, tenants, to frequent their parish churches, and never to go to these meetings, nor reset, nor entertain any that went, but to inform against, pursue, and deliver up all vagrant preachers, as they called them, to trial and judgment. Which they prosecuted with that rigor and restless, boundless rage that the children then unborn, and their pitiful mothers do lament the memory of that day for the loss of their fathers and husbands. Many houses and families then were left desolate in a winter flight. Many lost their cattle and horses, and some, in seeking to recover them, lost their lives by the sword of these burios. So that it was too evident, both by what orders was given, the severity of prosecuting, and the expressions of some great ones since, that nothing less than utter ruin and desolation of these shires was consulted and concluded, and that expedition at that time, calculated for that end, for what else can be imagined, could induce to the raising 10 or 11,000 barbarous savages, the joining them in the standing forces, and with such cruel orders, the directing them all to the west, where there was not one person moving the finger against them. Neither could they pretend any quarrel, if it was not the faithfulness of the people there in their covenanted religion, and their hopelessness of complying to their popish and tyrannical designs, and therefore no course so feasible as to destroy them. So for dispatching thereof, order is given forth that whosoever refuseth to subscribe that hill-hatched bond must instantly have 10, 20, 30, 40, more or fewer according to his condition, as he is poor or richer, of these new reformers sent to him, to lie not only upon free quarters to eat up and destroy what they pleased, but also for the more speedy expedition, ordered to take a sixpence for each common soldier a day, and the officers more according to their degrees, and so to remain until either the bond was subscribed or all destroyed. Nor was these trustees deficient to order their purposes in prosecuting their orders, who, coming to their quarters, used ordinarily to produce a billgate for near to as many more as came, and for these absents they must have double money, because their landlord was not burdened with their maintenance, and, where that was refused, would take the readiest goods, and if anything remained not destroyed and plundered at their removing, which was not transportable, rather than the owner should get any good of it, they would in some places set fire to it, as they did with the corn stacks. It would require several great volumes to record the many instances of horrid barbarities, bloods, and villainies of that wicked expedition, so that what by free quarterings, exactions, robberies, thefts, plunderings, and other acts of violence and cruelty, many places were ruined almost to desolation, all which the faithful choosed rather to suffer than to sin in complying, and albeit their oppression was exceeding lamentable, and their loss great, yet that of the compliers was greater and sadder, who loosed a good conscience in yielding to them and compounding with them. 9th. Then the country behooved to pay the soldiers for all this service, and hire them to do more, by paying the imposed cess, whereby they were sharpened into a greater keenness and cruel executions of their orders, returning to those places of the country whither they had chased the persecuted people, who still kept their meetings wherever they were, though they could not attend them, but upon the hazard of being killed, either in the place, where some had their blood mingled with their sacrifices, or fleeing, or be exposed to their dreadful cruelties, more bitter than death. But then it was counted a greater crime, and punished with greater severity, for persons to hear a faithful minister preach, than to commit murder, incest, adultery, or be guilty of witchcraft or idolatry, or the grossest abominations. For these have passed unpunished, when some, for their simple presence at a meeting, have been executed unto the death. Then also, when some were forced to flee into the English border for shelter, there also were parties ordered to pursue these poor hunted partridges, who could not find a hole to hide their head in. Therefore we lost a valiant champion for truth, and truly zealous contender for the interest of Christ, that universally accomplished gentleman and Christian, Thomas Kerr of Hayhope, who was cruelly murdered in a rencounter with a party of the English side. Thereafter followed that lamentable stroke at Bothwell, where about 300 were killed on the field, and about 10 or 1100 taken prisoners and stripped and brought into Edinburgh in a merciless manner. After which, first two faithful and painful ministers and witnesses of Christ, Mr. John Kidd and Mr. John King, received the crown of martyrdom, sealing that testimony with their blood, and many others after them for the same cause. Then the enemy, after the manner used before, first to wound our head, and then put a hood upon it, as they have done always after a mischief and intending a greater, offered their bond of peace on terms that clearly condemn the cause, never to rise in arms against the king, etc. By which bond many of the prisoners, after they had lain several weeks in a churchyard, without the shadow of a house to cover them night and day, were liberate. And many of the rest, by the persuasion of some ministers, at whose door their blood lies, as well as at the enemy's, took that bond, and yet were sent away with others that did not take it, in a ship bound for America, between 200 and 300 in all, who were all murdered in the ship, being shut up in the hatches, when it split upon a rock in the north of Scotland, except about 50 persons, whereof many to this are living witnesses of such a cruelty. 10th. Hitherto only the common rules and rudiments of the art of persecution were put in practice, exactly quadrating the rules of Adam Kotzen, the Jesuit, for introducing of popery, in his Polit Lib 2, caption 3, which are, first, to proceed as musicians do, in tuning their instruments gradually. Second, to press the examples of some eminent men to draw on the rest. 3. To banish all arch-heretics at once, that is, the most zealous witnesses of Christ, or at least with all expedition by degrees. 4th, to put them out of all power and trust, and to put in friends of the Catholic interest. 5th, to load the Protestant opinions as are most obnoxious with all odious constructions. 6th, to discharge all private conventicles. 7th, to make and execute rigorous laws against the most dangerous. 8th, to foment all quarrels against Protestants, and strengthen the party that is ready to comply. But these and many other of a deeper projection and greater perfection were fallen upon afterwards, equaling the most mischievous machines of Spanish Inquisition, or the methods that effectuated the desolation of the Church of Bohemia, that were exactly followed as they are related in Clarke's Martyrology. Especially the last of Kotzen's rules were industriously observed in the device of the indulgence both before and after Bothwell, which contributed more to the rending and ruining the remnant, and to expose the faithful to rage and cruelty than anything. For when, by these ensnaring favors, many were drawn away from their duty, the rest that maintained it and kept up the testimony were both the more easily preyed upon and more cruelly insulted over. Hence the field meetings that were kept were more fiercely pursued after Bothwell than the many before, and more cruel laws were made against them, and more bloody executions than I can find words to express in short. But, in a word, no party of Tartars invading the land, or crew of cutthroats destroying the inhabitants, or the most capital malefactors, could have been more violently opposed or more vigorously fought to be suppressed than these poor meters were. But I must make some more special hints. First, they not only raised more forces to exhaust the strength and substance of the already wasted country, and laid on and continued from one term to another that wicked exaction and cruel oppression of the cess, for the same declared ends of suppressing and banishing what remained of the gospel, and imposed localities, for maintaining the soldiers employed in those designs, for refusing which many families were pillaged, plundered, and quite impoverished, besides the beating and abusing of them. But also they went on unweariedly with their courts of inquisition, pressing the bonds of peace and dragging them like dogs to prisons that would not subscribe them, and for taking up in their Porteous rolls the names of all that were suspected to have been a Bothwell insurrection, which they gathered by the information of sycophants, and reputed them convict. In being summoned they did not appear, and forced others to swear concerning things that are to be inquired after, and delayed upon oath whom they did either see or heard that they were in arms or went to meetings, and such as refused suffered bonds or banishment. Yea, having made it criminal to rest, harbor, correspond, or converse with these whom they declared rebels, they thereupon imprisoned, fined, and ruined vast numbers, for having seen or spoken with some of them, or because they did not discover or apprehend them when they fancied they might, and even when they were not obliged, and could not know whether they were obnoxious persons or not. For which many gentlemen and others were indicted and imprisoned, and some arraigned and condemned to death. For these causes the country was harassed and destroyed by 4 extraordinary circuit courts, successively going about with their numerous train, whereby many were grievously oppressed, and with their oppressions tempted with many impositions of conscience, debauching oaths and bonds to compere when called, and keep the church, and to refrain from going to meetings, etc., and by these temptations involved in compliances and defections.